It's post-Thanksgiving, obviously, and now we're kind of leading up to the Christmas holidays. But I think the Thanksgiving theme is always a good one to talk about. And especially given last Thursday's activities, there's always lots of activity in the kitchen, right? If you're at my house and we had a dozen people over at the house, it seems like everybody kind of hovers around the kitchen. We have this center island in our kitchen, and everybody just kind of hangs out and eats appetizers and just stays there and kind of camps out in the kitchen. And so I thought, what better lesson than to perhaps share with you a moment and a glimpse in time in front of Martha's kitchen. And so, speaking of Martha's kitchen, the text of our message today is taken from Luke chapter 10, verses 38 through 42. While Jesus and his followers were traveling, Jesus went into a town, and a woman named Martha let Jesus stay at her house. Martha had a sister named Mary who was sitting at Jesus' feet and listening to him teach. But Martha was busy with all the work to be done, and she went in and said, "Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me alone to do all the work? Tell her to help me." But the Lord answered her, "Martha, Martha, you are worried and upset about many things. Only one thing is important, and Mary has chosen the better thing, and it will never be taken away from her." It's no mystery, perhaps to some of you, that I love milk. One of the saddest days in my life was when I learned that drinking a lot of whole milk could actually be on the unhealthy side because of the fat content and a number of other things. So with a lot of reluctance, I started to drink that watered down version of milk. But in my years of milk appreciation, I've also learned that there's a high price to be paid for leaving milk out of the refrigerator. That happened a while ago when I spit that spoiled stuff all over the kitchen floor. And I've learned that sweet milk can turn sour from being left too warm for too long. And it occurred to me that sometimes sweet dispositions in life can turn sour for the same reason. Let aggravation stew without a period of some cooling down, and the result, you get a bad, bitter, clabberish attitude. It's kind of like buttermilk, but I'm not really a fan of drinking liquids that have lumps in it, so I don't drink a lot of buttermilk. But apparently, buttermilk can reduce gas and bloating, so maybe there is some benefit to it after all. But I chose the 10th chapter of the book of Luke to describe this step-by-step process of how people can start out sweet and become sour, because it's the story of Martha. Now, she's a very dear soul with a talent for hospitality and organization. She's probably more frugal than she is frivolous, and she's probably more practical than she is pensive. Her household is a tight ship, and she is the stern captain of that ship. Ask her to choose between a book and a broom, Martha will choose the broom. Mary, on the other hand, will probably take the book. And Mary happens to be Martha's sister. Same parents, but two totally different priorities. Martha has things to do, while Mary has thoughts to think. The dishes can wait. Let Martha go to the market, because Mary will go to the library. So we have two sisters in this story with two very different personalities. And as long as they kind of understand each other, life goes on for both of them. But when one resents the other, it's kind of like flint against a stone. Sparks start to erupt. And the picture that I get from Luke is that Martha is probably the one standing by the table, wearing the apron and commanding the kitchen. Stirring with one hand and cracking eggs with the other, she just doesn't spill a drop. She knows what she's doing, and there must be now a very big crowd that's coming because there's a whole lot of food that's being prepared. And then she hears them laughing in the next room, and it sounds like they're having fun. Martha is not having fun. Stupid sister, you can almost hear her say. That's stupid, Mary. Here I am all alone in the kitchen while she's out there. And if I'd known that Jesus was going to bring his entire posse with him, I probably wouldn't have invited him at all. Because those guys eat like horses. They eat me out of house and home. Yeah, that sweet little darling sister of mine, always ready to listen and never ready to work. You know, I wouldn't mind sitting down myself for just a second, but all I do is cook and sew, cook and sew, cook and sew. Well, enough is enough. And at this point, you get the sense from the story that someone is going to get it. Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me alone to do all the work? Tell her to help me. Verse 40. Suddenly, the room goes deathly quiet, except for that tap, 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 tapping of Martha's foot on the hardwood floor and the slapping of the wooden spoon in her palm. She looms above the others. She has flour on her cheeks and she has fire in her eyes. At this point, the disciples are probably staring wide-eyed at this fury that hell hath not known. And poor Mary, she's flushed red with embarrassment, and she kind of sighs and sinks lower to the floor. And then only Jesus speaks, because only Jesus understands the problem. You see, church, the problem is not the large crowd. The problem is not Mary's choice to listen. The problem is not Martha's choice to host. The problem is Martha's heart. And it's a heart that has become soured with anxiety. Martha, Martha, you are worried and upset about a lot of things. Now, the truth is that Martha wanted to do what was right, but her heart was in the wrong place to do what she wanted to do right. Her heart, Jesus said, was worried. As a result, Martha turns from the happy servant into the beast of burden. She was worried. She's worried about cooking. She's worried about pleasing. She's worried about too much. And I kind of like what Irma Bombeck said about worrying. I've also worried a lot, and frankly, I'm good at it. I worry about introducing people and going blank when I get to my mother. I worry about a shortage of ball bearings, a snake coming up through the kitchen drain. I worry about the world ending at midnight and getting stuck with 3 hours on a 24-hour cold capsule. I worry what the dog thinks when he sees me coming out of the shower. That one of my children will marry an Eskimo who will set me adrift on an iceberg when I can no longer feed myself. I worry about sales ladies following me into the fitting room, oil slicks and Carol Channing going bald. I worry about scientists discovering someday that lettuce has been fattening all along. And apparently, Martha worried too much too. So much so that she started bossing God around. And you know, a lack of gratitude will do that to you. It makes you forget who's in charge. What makes this case interesting, though, is that Martha's worried about doing something really good, right? I mean, she's having Jesus over for dinner. She's literally serving God. Her aim was to please Jesus. But she made a common and a pretty dangerous mistake. Because as she began to work for him, her work became more important than her Lord. What began as a way to serve Jesus, slowly and subtly became a way to serve herself. And I'm guessing that process went something a little like this. As she began to prepare the meal, she anticipated the compliments that she would get about the food. And as she set the table, she imagined the approval of all of her arriving guests. Because she could just picture it, right? Jesus would enter the house. He would thank Martha for all of her hard work. He would ask all the disciples to give her a standing ovation. And John would probably cite her as an example of hospitality and dedicate an entire chapter in the Bible to Martha. Then women would come from miles around to ask her how she learned to be such a good host. And the rest of her days would be spent directing the school of servanthood with Jesus as its director and Martha as its professor. But things didn't turn out quite like she had planned. She didn't get the attention that she sought. There were no standing ovations. There were no compliments. There was no adulation. There was no school. No one even noticed. And that irritated Martha. But Martha is long on anxiety and short on memory because she has now forgotten that the invitation was her idea in the first place. She'd forgotten that Mary had every right to be with Jesus. And most of all, she'd forgotten that the meal was to honor Jesus, not Martha. And it's easy sometimes to forget who's the servant and who is to be served. And Satan knows that. And this tool of distortion might be one of Satan's slyest schemes. You see, he didn't take Martha out of the kitchen. He took away her purpose in the kitchen. The adversary won't turn you against the church. He'll just turn you toward yourself in the church. And he won't take you away from your ministry. He'll just delusion you in the ministry in which you serve. And when the focus is on yourself, you start doing what Martha did. You worry. You worry and become anxious about many things. You worry that your coworkers won't appreciate you. Your leaders will overwork you. And your superintendent will not understand you. With time, your agenda becomes more important than God's because you're more concerned with presenting self than pleasing him. And then you start doubting God's judgment. Verse 40 again. Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me alone to do all the work? Tell her to help me. And I kind of think that Martha probably regretted that after she said it. I bet that after she cooled down a bit, she would have loved to have had those words back. She probably wished that she had heeded Solomon's counsel, who says in Proverbs chapter 29, verse 11, a rebel shouts in anger. A wise man holds his temper in and cools it. And I think there's a principle here, church, not just for the Thanksgiving past Thursday, but also looking forward to Christmas and to the next year ahead of us. To keep an attitude from souring, you need to treat it like a cup of milk. You need to cool it off. You see, Martha's life was cluttered. She needed a break. Jesus said, Martha, Martha, you are worried and upset about many things. Only one thing is important, and Mary has chosen it. That's from our text, verses 41 and 42. What had Mary then chosen to do? Well, she had chosen to sit at the feet of Jesus. And it seems to me, church, and perhaps to you, that God is probably more pleased with the quiet attention of a sincere servant than the noisy service of a sour one. And I don't know that you've thought about this, but you know, this story could have been flipped. It could have been different. Mary, for instance, could have been the one to get angry and upset. I mean, the sister on the floor could have resented her sister that was at the sink. Mary could have grabbed Jesus by the arm, dragged him into the kitchen, and said, Jesus, would you please tell Martha to quit being so productive and to get a bit more reflective? Why do I have to do all of the thinking and the praying around here anyway? You see, what matters more than the type of service is the heart that's behind it. A grateful heart. A bad attitude spoils the gift that we leave on the altar for God. And it reminds me of a story about a guy who prayed with a really bad attitude. Why, he asked God, has my brother been blessed with wealth and me with nothing at all? All of my life, I've never missed a single day without offering morning and evening prayers to you. My church attendance has been spotless. It's perfect. I've never missed a Sunday. I've always loved my neighbor, and I've given them my money and my help. And yet now, as I have more days behind me than in front of me, I can hardly afford to pay my rent. My brother, on the other hand, drinks, gambles, plays all day long, yet he has more money than he can count. I'm not asking you, God, to punish him, but tell me, please, God, why has he been given so much and I've got squat? Because, God replied, you're such a self-righteous pain in the neck. So, church, guard your attitude. God has gifted each of you with a number of talents. And he's done the same for your neighbors, and he's done the same for family members. But if you concern yourself more about your neighbor's talents, what you'll end up doing is neglecting your own. But if you concern yourself with your own, then you could possibly inspire both. You see, church, gratitude is a choice. It's an attitude. It's something that you choose to do. And in this world and in this community, we have much for which to be grateful. For our health, for our families, for our jobs, for our homes, for our food, for the ability to see in color, to breathe air, to hear sound. We have so much for which to be grateful. And yet, during this season, we end up rushing through life thinking that gratitude is about purchasing gifts and receiving gifts and wrapping them just so. And there's no problem and no sin in gift giving. It's wonderful. But if we lose our focus and put more attention into the gift that's being given as opposed to the heart that's giving the gift, we'll end up just like Martha, worried about a lot and not taking the time to be a Mary and sit down at the feet of Jesus and listen. Because it's in Jesus we have our life, right? Eternally. And so if our life is to be invested in something that has eternal consequences, then that's where we should be spending our time. Not necessarily in the kitchen, not necessarily at work, not necessarily traveling or doing all the things that we do, but spending more time sitting at the feet of Jesus. And you can't do that without opening his word. That's how he speaks. And I realize that we are also given the gift of the Holy Spirit, and perhaps you hear these utterings from the Holy Spirit in your life, maybe prompting you to do something or not to do something else. But whatever the case is, it only matters that we spend time listening to Jesus, because in that, we then are assured that we will have the right attitude as we deal with other people. So not just this season, but perhaps looking forward now even into 2019. Let's focus our time and our attention on things that are important. Let's be grateful for the things that we have, and then let's share them with others with that same kind of grateful attitude. And I think in doing that, we'll be far less worried about many things and far more tuned in to what Jesus has to say. So we've selected a song, Count Your Many Blessings. And I think it's an encouragement for all of us to think about counting the blessings that we have, whatever they may be. Name them one by one. And it will surprise you, what? What the Lord hath done. If you have any prayer requests, as we sing this song, you can hand them up. We'll pray over those, and then we'll be dismissed. So Steve, let's stand and let's sing Count Your Many Blessings.